Welcome, students, to a video lecture session on the analysis of Martin Luther's I Have a Dream speech. Before we begin, I want to give you a brief backdrop of the author. Okay, so who is Martin Luther King Jr.? Martin Luther King Jr. is a prominent name in the genre of African American. He is a well-known American activist of his time and contributed a lot for the African Americans. Now, he was born on 15th of January 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, United States. He was also one of the Baptist ministers of his time, a great American Baptist minister. And so we see most of his works or speeches are inspired by Christian belief. This is what is reflected in this speech as well. Now, he's one of the prominent leaders in American civil rights movements from 1955 until the day he was assassinated, that is on April 4th, 1968. A few awards and prizes that he has won. One of those are is the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1964, and he was also awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which was done posthumously, that is after his death in 1977. Moving on to a few facts that we need to know about this speech. One is when it was delivered, in which context it was delivered, where it was delivered, and to whom it was delivered. So it was delivered on August 28, 1963, and it was a part of the march on Washington, and it was delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to a crowd of almost 250,000 people. And it becomes a very powerful speech on the ideology of racism and how to vote for equality in America. Now, it began with Martin Luther King Jr. referring to Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which was signed almost 100 years ago. And he was questioning that even after 100 years, we do not see any kind of change. So that Emancipation Proclamation was talking about the rights of equality, and every slave was free, but then every slave was just free in pen and paper. But in actual life, nobody is experiencing that kind of an equality. And that is the question raised by Martin Luther King Jr. Now, we see that it was addressed to numerous African men, women, children, all throughout. And there were several reasons for this, why this was delivered. And we see that the Emancipation Proclamation, which was signed in 1863, just 100 years ahead of 1963, which the time when the speech was delivered, he questions like, why are we still slaves? So he questions the various areas where the African American still finds himself or herself bound with the within the cages of slavery. Now, the major concerns of this speech, I would say, is basically equality, equality in all terms, like legal equality, like economic equality, the equality to live freely and with your heads held high, that kind of equality he talks about. And we see that there are some civil and economic rights as well that he talks about. He's also talking about the handicapping, the crippling effects of racial inequality and how dangerous that can be. And ultimately, we see that he proclaims equality, dignity, and true freedom through his speech. A few themes, again, I would say, is equality, one of those, and a few themes apart from equality, we see is the true essence of freedom, of justice, and a good, prosperous future, which includes not only the whites in America, but also the blacks in America. So, a real sense of equality. Now, the central idea of this speech I would start with is we see, first of all, before I start with this, we see that Martin Luther has made use of a lot of metaphors. and a lot of figurative speeches apart from metaphors as well, like anaphora, like alliteration, like imagery. So you're going to see a lot of those. And the central idea also governs that. One of those central idea is the metaphor of banking. In bank, we have like the exchanging of currency. And similarly, that metaphor is brought in here, and he talks about a promissory note. And a promissory note is actually a document which states that somebody owes something to you. And within a given duration of time, within that time, somebody has to pay something back to you. So now here, Martin Luther stands in the favor of and stands for his African American fellows, and he tries to question the people of America in terms of justice, the legal bodies of America, like where is that justice which has given us that promissory note 100 years ago, with the signing of the Emancipation Act, the Emancipation Proclamation. So that promissory note tells everybody that everyone in America is having equal rights to liberty, freedom, and equality, and can live their life in true freedom, irrespective of their color, their creed, their any kind of social, cultural, ethnic background. But then the question is, where does this exist? Even after 100 years, the African American is still in the same point where he was. And it is just in a piece of paper that they are free, but in actual sense, they are not at all free. This question is the central idea of Martin Luther's I Have a Dream. And then you see that he says that this promissory note actually guarantees every citizen of America the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So these are the rights that cannot be segregated from their lives. And why an African American is not having an access to this? That is the question. But then he also justifies that the promissory note that we got has actually turned out to be a bad check, because when we go take this note in asking the return for what is being allotted to us, we are not getting that. So it has now become actually, in the real sense, a blank check. When you take this check, go to the bank and ask them for the thing that they owe to you, they say that the fund is insufficient, which means your right, your equality, your mm, every pursuit of happiness, your liberty cannot be given to you because our bank does not have sufficient funds to give this to you. And that is the idea of banking, the metaphor of banking that is shown here. That is the central idea, and he's going to pull this central idea throughout, bringing in other ideas of a lot of other images and a lot of other metaphors. So the kind of style that he brings in, it is one of the most powerful, one of the most influential speeches of all times in history. And it's very rhythmic. When you listen to it, you will find that the sound goes high and the sound goes low, and a lot of alliteration, a lot of images, a lot of metaphors make it very powerful, very impactful. And he also accuses this um, the promissory note, the people of America, to have said that you are just trying to tranquilize the drug of gradualism onto us by giving this note and not doing anything. So 100 years have passed, but we still feel like we are under the drowsy impact of a drug of gradualism, which says that human evolve with time. So 100 years and we did not evolve. So do not keep on trapped under this idea of this gradualism, but you need to do something about it. That is the idea that he wants to convey. And he wants to bring in the real sense of freedom. And when he says that actually the Americans know the meaning of what freedom is, what liberty is, by giving the Negro or the Black man equal chance, the equal opportunities, the right access to their resources, that is the only day when America is going to know the value and the meaning of actual freedom. And that is the day when the American patriotic song is also going to make sense, which says, like, my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, I sing of I of thee I sing, land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountain side, let freedom ring. So these are the lines of that patriotic song. And the day when even the black and even the white and all the citizens of America are going to have an access, equal access to that equality, to that liberty, to that freedom, is the day when America is truly going to be free and actually reflect the meaning of the song that very day. Now, a few literary and rhetorical devices that we see here is ethos, anaphora, allusions, repetition, imagery, metaphor, and alliteration. Now, what is ethos is actually, it refers to the credibility of a speaker, how credible the speaker is. And he's a well-known figure, Martin Luther King Jr. So we see that he's a appealing figure. Anaphora is like a repetition of a few phrases like, I have a dream, I have a dream. Many times he keeps on saying this thing, I have a dream. 100 years later, now is the right time. So these are have been uttered repetitively, and these convey the idea that there's a beautiful anaphora going on throughout, a rhythm throughout. Allusions are a reference to a few other people, few other historical references, like Abraham Lincoln has been referred here. Now, we see symbolism, a lot of symbols around oasis and heat and mountains and hills. Everything has been described so well here. And imagery, we see much of images like the slums and the ghettos of our northern cities. These lines tell you about the imagery. There are a lot of imagery of building, of food, many things that you see around. Now, repetition, again, a few words and themes have been repeated throughout, repeatedly used, like freedom, justice, the power of dreams, a lot of things. And then you see much of alliteration, like alliteration is when you have the same sound throughout, like trials and tribulations, the same consonant sound, dark and desolate, sweltering summer, the SS sound, marvelous new militancy, the MM sound, trials and tribulations, TT. So these are all called alliteration. And then there are metaphors like heat, oasis, the valley of the joyous daybreak, the sweltering heat of oppression. These are the words when you see that a lot of metaphors are used. Talking about the metaphor, I would like to again say, beyond the metaphor of banking, we see the metaphor of food and drink. He talks about the bitterness, the cup of bitterness that we are drinking. And then he talks about uh, various the valley of despair. So all these words tell us that there are various metaphors used. And then the palace, he talks about uh, the palace of despair, the valley of despair. All these words tell us that a lot of metaphor has been used throughout his speech. Now, what was the impact of the speech? This speech has been remarkably known as one of the most important, significant, and life-changing speech of all times. Martin Luther has been one of the greatest orators of his time and in history. So we see that it, first of all, it legally and politically, it helped the Civil Right Act to pass, which passed in the year 1964, the very next year after the speech was delivered. So that was one of the plus points. And then it makes an observation of poverty and prosperity, we also see, and gives you your day-to-day understanding of what actually life is, and how we can take a step towards making it better by standing for our own rights. And it has been one of the most famous speeches in history, as I said. With that, we close this discussion. I hope this discussion and this explanation might have been useful to you. Thank you for watching.